Okay, so moving on, we're going to start building the shader now, so for this surface operator. So the way that we're going to approach this is we're gonna jump into Vex, into VOPs, yeah, and start laying down the blueprint for our new shader. So I'm gonna give myself a little bit more space to work with, and I'm going to start making a Vex surface shop type. Yeah. I'm going to give it a quick name, so let's call this PC Trail. PC Trail, there we go, and I'm going to jump inside. Right, there's my outputs. So there's the surface color, the surface opacity, the alpha, the normal information, and this one is related to physically based rendering, which we're not going into now. So to bring in my color information from my surface, I need to make a new parameter. So I'll make a new parameter, lay down a new parameter, and the most important thing here is the parameter name. So the parameter name that we are looking for is CD, the diffuse color. Yeah. So the other ones, the label is not as important, and the parameter name over there, the operator name, sorry, in VOPs is not as important either. Now, how did I find out the diffuse color, the CD? Well, I went actually, it's inside of objects. You can kind of find this out fairly easily. Go inside, focus on your skin, middle mouse button on your skin, yeah, and you can just about see it. Let's see if I can bring it a little bit more visible. Yeah. So there's my diffuse color information, and there's my alpha information. So as you can see, the CD, the way that it's written, the syntax is important. Alpha with a capital is important as well. We'll be using this one in a bit. But also the little 3 next to it, because basically we've got scalar values such as the alpha, but the CD, the color, is red, green, blue, which is a vector, is an array of 3 floats. Yeah, so we're gonna have to make sure that this type corresponds as well. Okay, so that's the way I found this out. You can do this with bring in any attribute as long as the name corresponds, so as long as the CD or whatever corresponds to any other attribute. So now I need to change my parameter type from a single float into a color. So you could say 3 floats vector, but I know that it's a color, so it's generally a good idea to put it on color. Note that when I did that, this little color flag changed as well, and I'm going to pipe my diffuse color into my surface color. Okay, so my blueprint has been created now, and I'm going to actually create a material out of this now. So I'm going to jump into shops, yeah? So shops. I'm gonna press tab and start typing PC Trail. So there's my PC Trail. Yeah? Okay, if in your situation this whatever custom operator does not show up, this is a little problem in this version of Houdini. So just restart Houdini and lay down. So save your scene, restart Houdini and lay down your operator. You'll see it'll show up then. It's just I suppose a viewport updating problem. Okay, so we've got our trail operator now. We're gonna assign it to our object. So go to object, go to material, yeah, and this little box will allow us to select the correct shader operator. So the one that I need to have is PC Trail 1. Okay, and say accept. Now that we've done that in the material is actually assigned to the operator. Yeah, so to the object. So we can start rendering. So right mouse button, view mantra, and we can do a test render. And this will basically start to show just the color information, nothing with the alpha since we haven't brought in the alpha. So the alpha is just completely white, yeah. But the color information is being transferred, so that's good. Okay. So I'm just also going to, yeah, I need to make a camera. Since I don't have any camera or light information in the scene, I'm going to create some light and a camera as well. Okay, so the way to go about doing that is I'm going to position my viewport as if I'm looking through the light, because that's basically what's going to happen. And I'm gonna press Control left mouse button on my spotlight, Control left mouse button, and it immediately creates a light at the position of my current viewport. If I want to change the position of the light, I'm going to lock my camera, yeah, and press spacebar, and now I'm kind of manipulating the position of the light. Yeah, so that's fine for me. And I'm gonna unlock this, yeah. So there's my light, yeah, and I'm going to now position my camera. So I'm kind of thinking like, yeah, something like this, will be good. So I'm gonna control left mouse button on the camera shelf, and there's my camera. I'm quickly going to check to see if it's not actually going out of bounds, but it looks alright. Yeah, looks good. Okay, so that camera is fine. I'm currently looking through it, so I'm going to start playing around with my shader now. So let's try finding a nice kind of position for it. Render it out quickly. Have a look again. So at the moment, so we have something to compare with. If I'm going to leave this template window open so we can start comparing as we go, and the frames will start to add into this. So I'll just drag this aside for now. Okay, back into Vex. Yeah. Into my PC trail. So I'm looking at my color information at the moment. I'm just going to maximize this again. Okay, so let's bring in the alpha. Yeah. So again, a new parameter. Yeah. Let's name it correctly. Name it alpha. Just copy paste it. Yeah. And paste it there. Right. And plug it into the alpha. Yeah. Now, if we re-render now, you'll see that the alpha information is actually updating, but it's not going to look any different. Yeah. So at the moment, 1 and 2, it's not looking any different, but the difference is in the alpha. Yeah. So you can kind of see over there, whereas this guy does not have any alpha information. Yeah. This guy now is having alpha information. But we need to pre-multiply this with the color so that it's actually starting to, have an effect. So let's pre-multiply this. Oh, I closed it. Well, anyway, we can still see the effect. So I'm going to lay down a multiply operation, the color with the alpha. Now, if you want to be clean about it, you could convert this alpha value to a vector, but it will work as well just with a multiply. I would recommend to convert this to a vector because we'll be, using this and it's cleaner that way. So let's just say float to vector, plug in this value in there, yeah, and I'm going to get rid of this input and just plug it in there, and this one will go into the product. Okay, so there's my little network. Okay, and let's render this again. Yeah, just to show you now that the color information is updating, but we're getting sort of an unexpected result. Now what's going on has to do with the surface opacity. Yeah. Now the alpha and the surface opacity are not really being affected correctly. So what I need to do is either I can use my alpha that I've got there and plug it into my opacity. Yeah. Or I can just create a new constant parameter. Yeah. Just a new constant. Yeah. I'm gonna tell it to be a color rather. Yeah. So this is gonna be a color, and the color by default is black, which is fine, and this will show up in my render. Right. And now we're starting to see this color information. I'll try to re-render this is fine. So you can kind of start to see how the alpha now is affecting the color information as well. Yeah? So that's fine. One of the things that you might want to consider as well is the way that the areas where there's like overlap, affect one another. So like I was mentioning, you can either use the alpha, or you can use the opacity value. So let's see what happens, if you just change this one and put it in there as well. Yeah. There's one thing that we're currently not taking into account at all. So over there you can kind of see. We'll see the difference hopefully between this and this. Yeah. So the difference. Yeah. Over there the overlap is not taken into account as much. So there's one thing that we kind of need to do, and that is use the previous surface value. So whatever value was already there, multiply it as well. So you can start to bring in some global variables. That's what I'll be doing now. So bring in global variables there, and what I need to do is the surface color, yeah, so the color of the surface needs to be multiplied with the the other color. Okay, so I'll plug it in there. I'll plug this one in there. Also, what I want to do is the existing alpha value, yeah, I want to multiply that with the other alpha value. So I'm going to do another multiply, bring in this alpha value, bring in this alpha value, yeah, and reconnect their output or the product up to like this, yeah. Okay, now there's no lighting information being used anywhere in the scene, so we're just getting a nice little result. Yeah, so something like this. Yeah, yeah, and let's bring in a lighting model so that we can kind of start to see some shading in there, and from there we'll continue on. So a lighting model, so start typing lighting model. The only thing that this needs is a diffuse color. Yeah, so we could say the diffuse color over there, this guy, yeah, put it into diffuse, yeah, and the output color will go into there. Yeah. Okay. Now if we render it, you'll start to see that it will actually try to use the lighting information. Yeah. So it's a lot less bright because my light is kind of positioned over there all the way at the corner. Yeah, but I mean everything else, the alpha and stuff, is still working. So it would be quite convenient if we have a little switch, yeah, where we can say, okay, do we just want a glowy kind of surface shader, or do we actually want the full lighting information? So in order to build that in, I'm going to actually build a little switch. Yeah? So let's start typing switch. Yeah? So switch has several inputs. Has got an integer switch input, so 0, 1 or whatever, and I will be using that. So let's create a little constant out of this, or rather parameter, because we're going to export it. And I'm going to call this one lighting switch, light switch. Okay. The label can be the same, and this one as well. Light switch. Okay. Then, as if the light switch is set to 0, let's say if it's set to 0, then we're going to be using no light. If it's set to 1, then we're going to be using some light. Yeah. Okay. Again, this will be multiplied by whatever previous color is going on in there, right? And so the light switch, the result of this light switch will now be plugged into the output. Yeah. So let's make this a little bit more bigger. Yeah. So all of the above has to do with the color information, the light information. A switch over there is multiplied with the alpha, yeah, the incoming alpha, and we're kind of not using the surface opacity at the moment. Okay. So let's have a look what that gives us in our shader. So like I was saying, this is our blueprint, so really what we're really interested in is taking a look at our shader. Yeah. Now in our shader you can kind of see that this is basically a light switch, yeah, so we can kind of start to change this, 0, 1, 2. So remind ourselves, 0 is no lighting information, 1 is lighting information. Yeah. In order to make this a little bit more user-friendly, we could just say, okay, back into Vex, yeah, go inside, and we say the kind of the type, instead of an integer, I want this to be a toggle. Yeah. So let's have a look, a toggle there. Yeah. So if I switch back to my shader operator, my shop, you can now see light switch. So click, and you can just turn this on or off, whatever you want. Yeah. So now it's on. It should use the lighting information. Alright, let's have a look. Oh, it's not using it correctly. So the reason why, light switch over there, so it's basically saying it's 0 now, it's 1 there. I'm probably missing some normal information. The normal information, so let's bring in the normals. The normals there. Yeah. And this is the incident normal, don't need that one. Okay, and let's try this again. Okay, so now I've got some lighting information in there, and I was wondering why it doesn't work for the... Let's turn it off, see if it still works. Should still work. Should still switch off. Yeah, so now we've got like one side and the next. So if I just turn this off, now the user is basically starting to have a little bit more control. So we've got our little light switch going on. Yeah, I mean the alpha and all that is still the same, but it's just the lighting information. Yeah? Now wouldn't it be nice if we have a little brightness multiplier, so we can actually start to adjust how much brightness we want. So instead of just having these values there, I'm going to start hiding the values that I don't want, which is like the alpha and the color. Don't want the user to actually play around with them because I'm sampling them from the input geometry. Yeah. So in order to do that, let's go back into Vex and let's just add in a multiplication. So this color information there, yeah, what we can do is just add a new parameter. Just start typing parameter, and I'm going to call this brightness. Now this will only affect the color, not the alpha. Right? A float is fine. I'm going to convert this one also to a vector. So float to vector. There we go. And just multiply it, add it, oh sorry, not in this one, add it into the multiplication. Yeah? So over there, just add it into the final multiply. Okay, yeah, I wanted to hide my parameters, so basically, as you could see from my shops, yeah, now I've got a little brightness multiplier over there. I should put this default on 1 because otherwise it's going to start all the way dark. But I want to hide these two. Note that the color and the alpha are still there. So if I jump inside of my FOPS network again, I've got my color there and I can turn on invisible. Yeah? If I turn on invisible for this guy, and I'm going to look for my alpha and do the same, so turn on invisible for that. Yeah? And I've got my alpha and my color, and they won't show up anymore into my shader. Yeah? So as you can see, I've just got light switch and brightness. Yeah? So that's fine. So I want to change the default value of my brightness now, so that it's a little bit better. So let's scroll down a little bit. Yeah, float default. So the default range is a bit bigger. Let's say something like, I don't know, 2, something like that. Well, so we can overshoot and undershoot, kind of see what we can get out of that. Okay, so the brightness by default is 1, and we can give it more or less. Yeah? So let's just say view mantra again. So this is the default. I'm going to turn off my light. Let's use this as a glow. Make it a little darker. So you can kind of the difference. Make it a bit brighter. And the user has now got like control over the brightness as well. So that's like, in short, how you can quickly kind of manipulate some of the parameters inside of shops, and and then basically a final note, you can render everything out. So you can kind of start rendering this out. If you didn't like the way that this is now showing up, like with this additive blending, then you can just change this. Yeah, jump inside, grab your output alpha vector. So basically you can kind of trace him. There's my multiply, there's my float to vector. It's getting multiplied over there. Then just put it inside like that. Yeah. And this alpha value is not correct either because it's not multiplied. So I need to make sure that my alpha value over there is corresponding to whatever the alpha value was. Yeah. Okay, let's do a quick test again. View mantra. Okay, so now we've got very, very gentle kind of surface information. I mean, probably can't see it too good. Let's try making it a little bit more visible. Yeah, so you can kind of see there's like a very, very thin line over there. Just as a quick test, right, just to show this. Yeah, you can just multiply whatever parameter you've got with a constant. Yeah? So you can just multiply this. Let's call this alpha mult. Yep. Float is fine, same thing again, so from 0 to 1 is fine in this case, and we'll just be multiplying this with our alpha, so just multiply it in there. Yeah? That's another exporter. So we want this one to be visible, okay, into our shader, alpha multiplier. Now we can start to make it a little bit more transparent if we wanted to. So we could say the alpha multiply is at 1, so this is default, just to show the contrast with the default operation. This is default at the moment. If I switch this to something a bit less, then you'll start to see, you know, it's kind of it's fading off. Yeah. So the entire alpha information has now been multiplied, yeah, with this kind of information. Yeah. So now you can kind of see where the alpha is more prominently there. You can kind of see it better. Okay. One more thing maybe is just to render out an output. So let's leave this at 1 and render out an output. So output, lay down a mantra, a new mantra render. Okay. Render any frame. Kind of change this to a frame range. Say like, I don't know. You could say 200 frames, something like that. The output command that I'll be using rather over there, the output is going to be there, images, and what I want to use, is in this case I've already got a folder, so I just can make a new folder, just call this image, accept image, and then you can call this trail underscore $frame4. This will basically give me frame padding, 4 zeros, or rather like 0001, something like that. And I'm gonna use a Targa format. This generally stores enough information. Since I'm using a quad-core machine on this case, and it's giving a little bit of problems with my render settings, I'm going to have a quick look to adjust this. My sampling is fine, render is fine, geometry is fine. The only thing that I do need to adjust is my mantra command. So I'm going to say -n4. So it's going to use 4 processors, but I need to turn off use maximum number of processors. I'll tell you the advantages and the disadvantages. So over there, use max processors, I'm going to turn this off. Yeah. Now basically this just disabled hyperthreading, because this tends to give some rendering errors for me in this version of Houdini. Problem with this one is that it will create 4 processes, so it will basically use a lot more memory than it would be the case in hyperthreading. And then you can just kick this off and say render. Okay, and that's it. I hope you learned something of this, and see you next time.